Does the United States of America have a military? By definition, yes. Does the United States of America have a serviceable military that could be used in time of conflict? My answer is going to be no. If we look at the numbers, it's no secret that since roughly about 2005, recruitment of the military in the United States has been on a sharp decline. More specifically, last year, 2023, recruitment was down roughly about 40,000 military personnel. Now, you might think, well, this isn't that bad. If we look at the numbers, there's roughly, according to the World Wide Web, there's roughly about 1.3 million active duty military personnel as of 2024. And you always want to take these numbers with a grain of salt, because why, if you were a government organization, why would you put your military headcount on the World Wide Web? Obviously, you wouldn't. So this is probably flipped a little bit. I'm going to say there's probably about roughly a million active duty, maybe 900,000. And you might be, well, that's a lot of people. Million's a large number. I would say I would take $1 million any day of the week. But if you look at historical numbers, in 1954, 1 year before the Vietnam War, there was roughly about 3 million active duty military personnel in the United States. And there was roughly, according to the World Wide Web, there was roughly about 3 million people deployed to Vietnam throughout its expenditure. Now, you might ask, well, if there was 3 million in the Army and there were 3 million in the military and 3 million deployed, then why did they need a draft for the Vietnam War? Well, obviously, your 3 million personnel are not all going to be deployed. I would say probably 10-15% of that number are people that are either colonels, generals, technicians, engineers, people that work on stuff. Not all. The point is, not all people in the military are going to be deployed. So even if you have the exact same number, not everybody's going to be deployed, and you're obviously going to need a draft to flip up those numbers a little bit. And this beggars the question, if the United States got into another conflict, we could just say more specifically a global conflict, as the Vietnam War was not a global conflict. Some argue it is, but it was most definitely not. It was a regional conflict. If the United States get into, let's say, even a regional conflict, you're going to have to draft, and it was the same size, same scale as the Vietnam War. You're going to need to draft at least roughly 2 million people, and I don't think I need to explain why that's a bad deal. You never want to have a military that is heavily draftees, because if you're not familiar with the draft, you get drafted, you get called up, they send you to basic for roughly about 6 weeks, then they deploy you. Most of these people have never shot a weapon in their life. Most of these people have never been involved in hand-to-hand combat, and most of these people have never seen somebody die in their life. So when you send these people out, they're not heavily trained, they're not going to be your best weapons, and they're not going to be the most resourceful, and they're not going to be the most productive. So you never want your army to be mostly draftees. It's not good for political or the social cultural looks on the government, and it's definitely not good for actual performance of the military. So you never want the most of your army or military to be draftees. And as we saw in Vietnam, there were some draftees, but it was nowhere near the amount as if we were to draft 2 million. I think it would be the largest draft in United States history, and it would just be absolutely unprecedented. Everybody would be freaking out, and it would be awful, and our performance in a global conflict would not be good. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that a lot of people say, well, you don't need a lot of people in the military nowadays because you have technology. Well, we had technology during the Vietnam War. The only problem was the enemies were in the ground. How are you going to use the technology if you can't see the enemies? That's when you actually have to deploy people, put them into the field and do operations and stuff like that. Because we had artillery, we had helicopters that could drop bombs. I mean, we might not have the advanced UAVs we had today, but we certainly had most of the technology that we had back then. So the argument that, well, you don't need as many people, that's completely irrelevant, because if the enemy knows what they're doing, your technology doesn't work. The ultimate hand-to-hand combat, that's why they say the first sport, ultimate hand-to-hand combat, wrestling, mixed martial arts, all that stuff, because it's impenetrable. If you're meeting somebody face-to-face, there's no other, that's the last form of conflict. So the technology argument is completely out the window. You need men. You have to have more than 1 million active duty soldiers if you're in a time of conflict. And that number needs to be higher regularly in the time of peace, because you can't rely on draftees. And I think the United States government knows this, because as I've said, their push for drafts have been exponentially increased in the last couple of years. This is seen in their commercials, their commercials have been way more persuasive. They're not just pitting join the Marines, join the Army. They're pitting actual physiological stuff, like cool stuff. They pit drones. I'll overlay the image video. They've included drones, tanks, and all that kind of stuff to persuade people to join the Army. They have to get more than just join the Army, we pay you. They have to get persuasive because nobody wants to join the Army nowadays. And this is actually where it gets to the meat of the video. I am currently enrolled in state school, so I have a email, and here recently in my email I have been getting propaganda, whatever you want to call it, propaganda advertisements. I would say advertisements to join the Army. I'll get a picture up of them if I can, but basically it's just Army, join the Army, and then list all the stuff in the Army. Now what I want to talk about is that I am a minor, so I am a child, and the United States of America does have regulations on advertising to a minor, and let's just look at some of those. The Federal Trade Commission, which roughly covers this stuff, is mostly focused on consumer health. And if we're thinking about it logically, my health is in danger if I decide to join the military, which you're advertising to me. So there's a little bit of a contradiction. And then mostly what they focus on is the government mainly focuses on mature content, which does include violence. And while there is no violence in the advertising, I would say that the military is a very violent profession. And then also contracts, which is the big one I want to cover. As a minor, you cannot sign a binding contract without a legal guardian or whatever. So when people advertise a binding contract, that is illegal. And if you didn't know, to join the military, you have to sign a binding contract. Now, they don't necessarily advertise the binding contract inside of the advertisement, but it's like inferred. So there's very loosey-goosey on whether this is the government's advertisement for their military is legal or not. And this really shows you that the United States military is getting very, very desperate. And if they don't do something soon, they are going to run out of time sooner or later, and we're going to get into global conflict, and we're going to see that the United States military is not the former glory that it once was. And this is an actual thing here, not necessarily related to the government, but the Council of Better Business Bureaus, which is not related to the government, but it's basically just businesses and stuff. They recommend that you, or they recognize that children are especially impressionable and vulnerable. If I look at, this is a very good example, why would you advertise to children? This is just immoral. Not only is it immoral, it can be illegal at times. If I am a child, I think it's cooler if I see people running around with guns and flying drones than if I just saw an Army logo and say, join the Army, you get paid. That's way more exciting to me, and I'm way more vulnerable to be attracted to that because it's cool. And how do I know any better? I'm a minor. I'm still goo goo gaga. It's just the United States of government military is in extreme danger if they don't do something soon. And it is very apparent by their recent global push for recruitment that it's not hard to find. All you have to do is look at it a little bit. They are in extreme trouble. If they don't do something soon, then the United States of America, as we know it, might fall into the citizens' hands. That's about it. Stay safe and stay hydrated.